Hi, everybody. I'm here today with William Skeen, who's going to be presenting the sixth of Bach's cello suites on March 29th. And I really hope you'll join us. It's going to be wonderful. Thanks so much, Bill, for being here with us today.
Oh, anytime. Thank you for having me.
So I'm really curious because you're a specialist. You play pretty exclusively Baroque and classical period cellos, right?
Yeah, occasionally I'll pull out the modern for fun, but basically 97% of the time it's on a period instrument.
Wow.
And that includes the viola da gamba, of course, too.
Right, that's right. Would you tell us a little bit about that? Because viola da gamba is used in Baroque music as well as earlier, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, it was basically a Renaissance instrument which lived its life into most of the Baroque period, well, the entire Baroque period, waning by the end of the Baroque period, and is completely obsolete after about 1750. And until the 20th century, of course, and it had a rebirth. So.
Yes, as all of the period instrument movement has really evolved. Did you start on modern cello and switch over, or have you concentrated on period instrument stuff for most of your career?
Well, I guess I'd have to say for most of my career now, because I started on modern cello as a young boy, and not that young though, age 9. So I wasn't sort of a Suzuki kid, but went through the whole conservatory program in Cleveland, and halfway through that program, I tried out a Baroque cello and a gamba, thinking I'd never do it again, of course, because who knows if I'll ever be able to have my hands on this? Is it a viable career? But I ended up in grad school in LA at USC, and there was a program there in early music, which I was not a part of, but I had my hands on the instruments there and played in the ensembles, and it just seemed like something I was always interested in, seeing the origins of anything, the history behind it. I always had teachers who were inquisitive about what this music was meant to sound like. Let's just say, who knows what that is. But it sort of piqued my interest, from an early time in my life, and just finally had my chance to have access to these instruments in college and in grad school. And then realized that there was a real need for players, at least where I was in LA. And so by the time I got out of grad school, there were 2 Baroque orchestras just waiting for someone to fill shoes, to play in. Very lucky. I just had lots of time with the instrument and thought, hey, I could really do something with this. It'd be harder to sort of be at the top of the field and modern cello. There's so many great players, but hey, I could probably try to do this.
That's how it worked out.
Yeah, I love doing it. So it didn't, it wasn't like I was giving up something. But
yeah.
I still love pulling out the modern cello and playing it. I find it, pretty easy to do actually, compared to this instrument.
Yeah. I'm really thinking about what you just said about how who knows what it actually sounded like, right?
That's
and true. I'm curious whether maybe the instrument kind of tells you.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, you can string them in a variety of ways. I mean, always in gut strings, but that doesn't account for the tension that you put on it. So there are people who play with very light tension, mostly in Europe, and they get that kind of a sound. Maybe not so strong, but a little bit warmer. I don't know. I keep my instrument fairly tense, so it almost has the feel of steel. It can be more bright and a bit louder. Sometimes I'm asked to please hold back a bit. It just depends. Yeah. So really, I mean, there is no one way that these instruments sounded, even today. So we're all trying to figure out how we think it sounded.
Yeah, and how I imagine how the music asks you to, what kind of choices the music is asking you for.
Well, sure, yeah, and you can also be a player with a completely different sense of what tone quality is on these instruments, and play it, however you want to musically. It all works. It's just, it's, I'm almost more shaped by colleagues and conductors and people asking for certain things. So I certainly could end up in a different direction if I had different mentors and different
Yeah.
around me.
Well, when you're playing Bach on these suites, it's just you with the instrument.
True.
So those kind of choices are more personal, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and in fact, I mean, I'm glad we started talking about tone quality, because that's actually my number one determination. I guess besides pitch and rhythm and all those nuts and bolts. I mean, the first thing I notice about anyone's playing, and the hardest I am on myself, is about tone quality. Again, it's someone might say, well, that Skeen, he sure sounds strident and bright, but maybe that's what I like. But yeah, so I've spent a lot of time working on that to just get exactly the tone that I would like, and it's really so much more difficult on gut strings than on steel. They sort of, in a way, do whatever you ask, and these you have to coax out the sound and work on resonance, because you're often in a space where there's just carpeting, and you don't have vibrato as an extra tool to warm up the sound. So you have to do it all yourself, all while dealing with these strings, which are very temperamental. And if your contact point is just a millimeter off.
Well, I personally think it's worth it, just because the personality of the music it's just different with the gut string instruments. I find it really warm and kind of intimate in a different way.
Right. I'm glad you said intimate, because that's another sort of concept I have. I mean, usually these pieces are, thought of as, like Yo-Yo Ma goes to the Hollywood Bowl and plays for nearly 20,000 people. And you have to have a certain tone to do that. And, having the steel strings helps, and being able to use vibrato as a constant tool, it's helpful. But just these instruments are just more naturally suited to a very small room, usually wood or stone or something like that. And so, I mean, when I play these pieces, when possible, I prefer to keep it intimate and just inside, use my inside voice.
So had you heard the suites before you started playing cello? Where did you come across them, and what's your origin story with the Bach suites?
Yeah, actually, I can't say I heard. I'm sure I heard them on the radio or something before that. My father was a big fan of classical music, just generally classical music. So it was certainly playing in the house. Whether I knew a Bach suite from anything else, when I was 9 years old, who knows? But I did. My first real teacher, probably from age 10 or 11, was actually a modern Bach specialist, Eugene Eicher, and he, amazingly, he had actually published his own edition, which was considered kind of early music at the time. Back in, I guess it was probably in the 60s when he published this, and a lot of the articulations and slurring and bowing he put in there were kind of radically clean looking to most people. So I really got it early. He was very much into teaching Bach and teaching expression, the kind that you need for Bach, not the vibrato kind, but the timing and the phrasing kind. So I was very lucky to get it right away from him. And then it just, snowballed from there. He didn't necessarily know what a period instrument was himself, but just talking about just the phrasing so much, and how to make music out of this, just makes you automatically think about the origins of the music itself.
That's wonderful. I've been thinking a lot about why this music is so emotionally powerful. My experience of it, from the minute you hear the sound of one of the preludes, it's like entering an alternate reality that's really emotional and really powerfully evocative. And I am finding out that, it's really quite recently that the suites became so important culturally. They were sort of forgotten for a long time, even into, the 20th century. It wasn't a performance piece. It was more a study, exercises and stuff. But I think this is incredibly powerful and emotional music. And I'm wondering whether you agree and what you think of it is about them that gives them that power.
Well, yeah, a little bit about the origin story. I'm not a historian per se, but there's the sort of mythology about the Pablo Casals discovering these, and there's only a bit of truth to that. I mean, certainly he found it, at his local, music store, or whatever the story goes. But there was an in between. There were certainly editions that were published until the 1840s, I think, and there was also the Schumann arrangements for cello with piano accompaniment to the suites, which is not all of them, I don't believe, but some of the movements. So there was a little life in the middle there between 1850 and when Pablo Casals discovered them, and then of course he's so amazing and just really brought them to life and did all that. My thought about how they fit into the scheme of all cello solo repertoire. I mean, obviously they're huge nowadays, but I have a little bit more access to some of the older 18th century solo music that was going around, that existed back then as well. I mean, it's not a whole lot of it, and certainly the Bach suites are a huge part of it, but it's not the only stuff out there. So I have a little bit of a take that, yes, they're great pieces. Yes, they're incredible. Every single note Bach ever wrote was perfect in every possible way. But, it also fits into the tradition of the Mare, Gamba, suites, and I mean, obviously those had accompaniment, but, it's not unique to have a set of 6 movements ordered exactly this way. That's kind of normal. And there was certainly some slightly earlier, late 17th century solo cello music. So of course, not as great as Bach, but good, pretty good. And there's stuff right after it, these Dall'Abaco caprices, and it just goes on from there in the 18th century. So I see it a little bit differently. I mean, we all have to honor it because it is great, but it's not the only thing out there. And I hope that maybe some of our modern cellist colleagues can explore more of that stuff too that exists, just to sort of put Bach into context.
That's so cool. I mean, I know there were other composers who really loved writing for cello, Boccherini, of course, but, earlier. But I think you're right that people aren't aware of that repertoire, and the Bach suites sort of are in this box by themselves, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's true. They're better than everything. It is true. So I don't want to take anything away from Bach, but just I also just always have to say, yes, these are 6 suites for solo cello, but there were also a million suites for solo gamba and around the time, and they're all sort of patterned the same way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The source material is so distant and has been interpreted so many times that a serious performer really has to come to terms with your own sense of what is intended and what the music means. And so those reinterpretations for gamba or for, viola, I guess it isn't that different in terms of the notes on viola, but just the music is open to those kinds of interpretations. I didn't know that Schumann did arrangements of these.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I mean, anyone who plays the 6th suite, unless they're using an instrument like the one I'm using, or perhaps this other instrument that some people think it's for, are playing an arrangement. I mean, you have to rewrite it to play the 6th suite on 4 strings. I did it in grad school too, just like everyone else had to do it. It makes it, much more difficult, of course, when you only have 4 strings, but there just simply are chords you cannot play. So, yeah, and there's this arrangement of the suites for viola da gamba, which were just beautifully performed and recorded by Paolo Pandolfo. And some people think it's one of the best interpretations there is, where he changes the keys of some of them because you just have to do that. And so, yeah, there are all kinds of adaptations you have to do to make it possible. But, the music is so great, it really can be played on anything. I mean, I think I hear trombonists trying it. I certainly have heard an oboist try it before.
I have a friend who who played it on electric bass.
Sure.
They're
Oh,
fantastic.
anything's better on the electric bass.
You would have said so, yeah. Oh, well, Bill, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to our session together on March 29th. And I hope you guys will all join us. The series starts on March 8th. That's right, March 8th, Tuesday, and goes through April 12th. And Bill's session on the 6th suite will be on March 29th. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lolly.